Good morning, good afternoon, everyone joining us here um, to this panel, which is a panel that we didn't manage to complete during the excellent Slide2Open Ship Finance Conference some time ago. And the idea of the panel was to brainstorm actually among competent people, experts on transport and supply chains. What is happening actually as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and what are the impacts, disruptions, and the new reality with regard to our sector, which is the transport and port sector. And we are facing challenges that we will discuss, and we will ponder on possible solutions that there may or may not be to address, at least in the short run, the problems that we are facing. So, let me introduce to you three colleagues that need very little in terms of introduction. And clockwise, as I look at my screen, there is Jan Hoffmann of United Nations Geneva. Below, Theo Notteboom of University of Antwerp and Shanghai Maritime University. And then Mike Lai, of our colleague of Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And one person missing here as a result of prior commitments and not being able to join us is Paul Kent, a very distinguished expert person whom we would like to have here to tell us a few things about the situation in the United States, as Mike will do and inform us about the situation now in Hong Kong and China, particularly in view of the very unique, remarkable developments that they are taking place in Shanghai, the major par excellence financial center of the world these days, and a city of 25 million inhabitants, that they are facing a very tough lockdown. So that was the original panel that now consists of myself as a sort of a moderator and my three distinguished colleagues. And my idea was is actually to start with the more theoretical aspects of what is happening. And what is happening is excess demands, limited and slow supply, congestion, inflation, high prices, and the new normal. And if I may, I would like to start with Theo Notteboom to tell us, or focus rather, on aspects related to ports and issues there. Then I would like to continue with Jan Hoffmann, hoping that I have seen that he has prepared a few slides about Ukraine as well, because UNCTAD has a terrific database of country data, whom we find very, very valuable and use. And then Mike to tell us about the Asia scene and what is happening there. And I believe during our discussion, we will raise aspects and issues in North America. Paul has sent us some bullets. I will try maybe at the end, if not during the discussion, to pick them up. But the idea was after our presentations, and this time we have adequate time, then we can have an open discussion. So that was the original idea. So following our or your brief presentations, then we have enough time to make it a roundtable discussion and see what is coming out of this. So let us then, I hope I'm not forgetting something in terms of an introduction, but if I do, this is also fine. And let me pass the word then to Professor Notteboom for his initial introduction, and then we move on. Please, Theo, take the microphone.
Thank you, Hercules, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So very happy to be here and to share some thoughts on the current supply chain crisis, particularly looking at ports. I would like to make 4 points, which I would like to make in view also of the discussion, the debate we will have later on. And I'm sure some of the other panelists will also come back to some of the points I will make. First point relates to the rigidity versus the flexibility in port systems. We have seen during this supply chain crisis that port systems around the world are not always able to cope with these flows, the peak in flows that we are witnessing right now. And in some port systems, you see shifts taking place between ports, cargo moving from one port to another, finding a new route into the hinterland. While in other port systems, it seems that that shift is not so easily made. And I just take the US example. If you look at the US port system, more than 40% of all cargo moving in and out, containers that is moving via LA Long Beach, which are adjacent to each other. If you only look at the Asian imports, that figure is even much higher. It's close to 60%. So two ports which are adjacent are handling 60% of all Asian imports for the US. Now, you would think that the other ports in the US would cater for the overflow that would be created by congestion in LA Long Beach, but we have seen that this is not so easy. So there is a kind of lack of flexibility, in my view, in order to cope with a sudden increase of flows in several of the main gateways in the US. In Europe, in my view, this works a little bit better. Also there you have, of course, a very large ports such as Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, and also in the Mediterranean. But it seems that also medium-sized and even smaller container ports have played a role in capturing some of that cargo and thereby preventing further congestion issues in those ports. So I think rigidity in the port systems is a major concern given the current supply chain crisis, and initiatives should be developed in order to reduce rigidity. Initiatives could be developed by the market players themselves, the shippers, the shipping lines, but also I think here and there some government initiatives are welcomed. So that's my first point on the rigidity versus the flexibility in port systems. The second point relates to the liner services that are calling at the ports. And we have seen figures coming out showing that schedule reliability is at around 30% or even less in the last 1.5 years, which is, of course, very, very poor figure. So my comment here is, what is the use of having schedules in place when you are dealing with such a low schedule reliability? Are there any alternatives? Do we have to move to a more flexible port calling system whereby customers are not too fixed anymore on any schedule that might be produced by the shipping lines? If that would happen, if there would be more flexible calls of vessels, then of course this will have an impact also on the ports. So ports and terminal operators will have to prepare for a much more flexible environment in which ships will not follow schedules anymore, but will arrive depending on availability of capacity and on the current status of their trip. A third point I would like to make relates to the major developments that are taking place in the shipping industry. Many of the shipping lines now have very deep pockets due to the high profitability. And we see companies such as Maersk, CMA CGM, MSC, and a few others moving into other activities. At the same time, we also see that large retailers and even e-commerce firms are moving into logistics, even into shipping. And maybe you have read about the fact that Walmart, Amazon, they all are chartering vessels. And very recently, it was big news here in Europe that Lidl, which is a supermarket chain, is going to start up its own shipping company. So these are big developments. And so we are going to be faced with a completely different market environment in which we cannot simply say that a company is either a shipping line or a logistics company. They will all be in the same game, trying to provide end-to-end services to their customers. And this, in my view, is also going to have a huge impact on ports, because ports will have to start targeting different types of clients than they were targeting in the past. So this is a third point I would like to make. And then the last point I would like to make is the bias we might have in analyzing the current situation. What do I mean? Well, also in the past, we had disruptions where there was either overcapacity or sometimes also a lack of capacity in the port systems. And we always thought that these kind of crises would last very long. If you go back to 2004, 2005, we really had a terminal capacity crisis. Well, that crisis evaporated in a matter of a year, 1.5 years. And in 2008, 2009, also at that time, we were very much looking at this huge economic downturn, which in the end led to recovery in the years to follow. So my comment is, are we also now not looking too much at the current situation of high freight rates, of capacity limitations or crisis? Maybe this crisis will be over sooner than we think, and maybe also these rock bottom freight rates that we had before the crisis might come back to some extent. So these are my 4 points, Hercules, and I'm always open, of course, to discuss these further with the panelists. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Theo. Important points, valid points, both for ports and their rigidity and carriers and the amazing profits that they are realizing these days, which, however, as you correctly said, they are funneling into activities not shipping related, but different economic activities. And one might consider and say that, these companies in 2008, 2009, they were almost bankrupt, correct? And they were bailed out by taxpayer money and governments. Good examples were CMA CGM, they were Hapag-Lloyd, and so on. Now they're making these investments out of the profits that they realize, but one might say, shouldn't they first return what is due to the taxpayer of the country that bailed them out in 2009 before they start investing in other non-transport related activities? That might be an issue, a point to discuss. I don't want to take time, and I'll try to immediately go to, and then we have time for our discussion, to Jan Hoffmann. Please, Jan, take the microphone.
Yes, I have unmuted. I hope that works. Very happy to be with this illustrious group in very interesting times in shipping. There was the theme of the conference was euphoria. Is the shipping world, is it for real? And I think since this theme was given out, some bad news have happened. The organizer said they will have a little setting that I can share some slides. So if the organizers could kindly, there it is. So I have a way here to pass on the slides. And I point out here to the euphoria of the original title and share with you the maritime country profile of Ukraine. Hercules had mentioned early on, we have a lot of statistics from a wide range of sources who are really much appreciated at UNCTAD, and we convert this to public good. So anybody of you listening, seeing this discussion, you can find your country's maritime country profile, 3-page picture with the market shares, with some hard data, with the fleet, with whom are you trading and so on. I just want to show here that for Ukraine, they have a very high market share in the world in terms of seafarers. And these are, of course, right now suffering from the war, from the crewing crisis. It's really a very, very difficult situation for them. And you can also see in which shipping segments does the country have the highest number of port calls. And there you see dry bulk and general cargo, dry break bulk at the bottom. So this, of course, reflects the importance of Ukraine as trading in grains, in food, which again has an impact on many others. It just shows how globalized shipping is. You have a situation in one corner of the world, an Ever Given stuck in Suez, or ships waiting in front of Los Angeles, or lockdown in China, or a war in Ukraine, and the freight rate from Vietnam to Santos in South America goes up and goes down. So that is one thought about euphoria. And the seafarers, not just the Ukrainian seafarers, all the seafarers are still, and again, suffering from the difficulties in changing crews, where we had a recent call for action together with the IMO, ILO, and World Health Organizations. The long-term picture, again, a bit dampening the euphoria. While the elderly gentlemen sitting here were studying and teaching economics, we always said shipping is growing faster than the economy. Actually, since 2015, shipping is growing slower than the economy. Then the issue of consolidation, of having on the one hand ship sizes going up, on the other hand services, number of companies providing services going down, is another area of concern from the shipper's perspective. A lot of these things we could discuss for hours, but I want to leave some time for conversations about some of these key data. Another key data I thought interesting for this discussion is hard data on how long ships spend in port. So we have this data here from marine traffic for several years already, and the long-term trend had been negative, in the sense it was a positive trend, but it meant time in port was going down in the long term. Now, since COVID, the world median has actually gone up. The typical container ship, and we have this data for all types of ships, but for the container ships, typical container ship spends 20% longer in port today, or second half of 2021 is this data, than pre-COVID. And this then, of course, leads to what Theo, Hercules alluded to, the whole issue of congestion, delays that take up capacity, which in turn then leads to the shortage of supply and the high freight rates. And here's the very latest trend. It has gone down since the peak, but it is still higher than the long-term average. And now I dare make a forecast. It's a bit tricky because Theo just said we might come back to rock bottom freight rates. It is true, it might happen. I still dare make the forecast that the average over the next 10 years will be higher than the average over the last 10 years. And here's why. Number one, 6 reasons. Number one, the COVID impact is still not over. It'll take time. There will be slowdowns in processes. The whole issue of social distancing, the care taken, it'll take time. The whole crisis caught us in a very bad moment in the long-term shipping cycle. So yes, now we have had the new orders, and I know Theo was thinking about those. Now we have a surge in new orders, and who knows if the demand now goes down due to the war and other negative impacts. But still, it takes time to build the ships, and the crisis caught us when there was a very low level in the global order book. Then there's consolidation. I mentioned this. Yes, the carriers may not have such a cutthroat competition in future as they may have had 10, 15 years ago, because there are fewer of them, and there are alliances that help them. Now, I do not think, and we had a discussion in other fora here, I do not think that the alliances and the current consolidation is to be blamed for the surge in spot rates at the moment, because we have had other markets. I'm sharing here with you the BDI, LNG, oil in different phases, but still, this cutthroat competition may not be that much forthcoming the next 10 years. Then, of course, there's decarbonization. The biggest transition in shipping. We want to get to zero at some point in time. This costs money. We have done a very detailed impact assessment at UNCTAD for the IMO. There's no doubt it costs money. And ships, at least at the beginning, will go slower. That's the easiest way to reduce emissions. You go slower. And if you go slower, we have the same effect as spending more time in port. You reduce the effective capacity. So will we have enough ships? And last but not least, yes, there is a risk premium. If there's more volatility, if there's the war and other black swans, pink swans, this, of course, also has a negative, has an impact that the suppliers and the users of shipping services are ready to charge and pay a risk premium. Now we have seen now the shippers, the clients, they say, oh, just make sure I get the goods, I pay whatever it takes. So that is another aspect that I believe the risk premium of shipping will be higher in future than it has been in the past. So that's a quick run through why I'm pessimistic from the user's perspective about the future of freight rates. There is a clear impact on prices. We did a simulation end of last year that the high freight rates lead to 1.5% additional consumer price inflation, 1.5 percentage points. This has basically been confirmed. There have been recent studies by the IMF, some of our member countries. We have recently updated this simulation. Actually, we are now at plus 1.6%. We'll publish this in a few weeks. So it is confirmed there is an impact on prices. And which products are most affected? Two types of products. On the one hand, cheap products, where the freight rates mathematically makes up a high share in the price. And secondly, products with very deep supply chains, where before you ship the high value goods in a container from Shanghai to Los Angeles, the bits and pieces inside the product have been shipped first from Vietnam to Thailand, then from Thailand to Korea. So again, the high freight rates have a bearing on the prices also of these high value goods. That was a quick sharing thoughts by way of introduction to engage in some discussion on this daring forecast, and I give back to Hercules.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much. Amazing discussion. Actually, it makes me think that maybe we should try to continue to institutionalize this discussion and have it once a month. And in a sense, we may even invite guests to contribute and have an institutional forum. I drop the idea on the table. Despina can consider about this, and if she can make her facilities available for such a discussion. But anyway, important points. I would say connectivity, your brainchild for many, many years now, and you connected to the problems that shippers are facing as a result of reduced connectivity, particularly in the United States. Important point we can discuss further of the number of ships that they are waiting now outside major ports. and your 20% increase in waiting time at anchorage, which is quite significant. So we have research in these regards, including my colleagues at Erasmus University, Albert Veenstra, who is publishing now on how we can improve ETA information, so that if we reduce the big gap that we are facing in the messages that ports are receiving from ships regarding their ETA, this would help us quite a bit to organize better the various activities that we have to carry out until the ship is at berth and starts cargo handling operations, and up to the point where it departs again. They are developing a very interesting case study of the port of Antwerp. They have already published some results out of this, and there is the research continues, particularly also in view of the just-in-time arrival. Now, also classification societies, they have done work on this. This is good. You've mentioned slow steaming, which nowadays is considerable. Yeah, but we save on fuel. We protect better the environment from emissions. Again, however, traders and shippers will complain because slow steaming increases their pipeline inventory, and this for them costs money. But this is this is a very important issue we can address if you like. And finally, you mentioned alliances, and we have all been struggling with the with the effects of alliances and capacity coordination on the current situation of freight rates, as well as the declines in connectivity that we witness in many parts around the world. Okay, we go to our third presentation by Mike. We are all very concerned about what is going on these days with the Omicron variant of the COVID virus. I just as we speak saw a note from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. I haven't read it yet, but I think it informs us about relations, contacts, travel, etc., with the city of Shanghai. There is speculation that what is going on in Shanghai may be due to China's zero tolerance policy against the virus, but there is also concern that so much mobilization and such strict reactions to infections might be that hide something behind. And it might be that, who knows, there may be a new variant that might be cause for concern. Yesterday, luckily, the World Health Organization came out and reassured us that this is not the case. So we are not looking at a new threat, but is also due to China's zero tolerance policy, what is happening in Shanghai. Okay, Mike, we're all yours.
Okay.
Please,
Yes, yes.
Mike, thank you, Mike.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're all yours.
Thanks, Hercules, for your introduction. I'm very happy to see friends Theo and Yung in the panels. A very old friend, and like to see Hercules. And thank you for your organizing these panels. So the topic of today's webinar is about the back swarm and the disruption. Actually, COVID and also the Omicron is a black swarm, and we have seen many black swarm in life. For example, the 2011 earthquake in Japan, the 2003 SARS in China, and the 2004 tsunami in Indonesia. They are all black swan. They are also causing a shortage of parts and products. But what is so special about the COVID is that this is global, and that the production and also our operations cannot be recover very soon in a matter of weeks. So we see that the effect of the COVID is more impactful and long-lasting. And currently in Shanghai, it sends 25 million of people into lockdown and total confinement. And it also contributes to the shutdown of this major, not only the major trade city, but also the financial center of China. And the COVID is currently disrupting the operation of most supply chain in Shanghai, such as the pharmaceuticals, food, electronics, and automotive industry. And the COVID has adversely affect supply chain with major turbulence in manufacturing, processing, transport, logistics, and there can also be a shortage of supply in many different areas. So now is the time to think about how to reverse the disruption caused by the black swan, and maybe enterprise need to think about the resilience, and also to think of the ways to reduce the vulnerability in the disrupted time. And currently, for the situation in Shanghai, so to avoid large-scale infections, so there's a range of precautionary measures to curb the spread of COVID. And the government is also very strict in the zero-tolerance policy to curb the spread of COVID. And they have a number of restriction policy, for example, travel restrictions, and also people entering into Shanghai, they cannot leave until they have finished the quarantine period. And there can also be shutdown of factories and outlets. And also, most serious is about the mandatory confinement of all inhabitants in the Shanghai city. So this all restriction has led to the shortage in the labor and raw materials, as well as food and daily necessity of the residents. And this situation is also worsened by the tightening controls on the logistics system. So for the supply from outside the Shanghai city, so once the driver has entered in the Shanghai city, they cannot leave. They need to stay in the Shanghai for a period of time until they finish the quarantine period before they are allowed to leave. This means that all the supply going to Shanghai, the truck cannot go out. So this can also causing a disruption to the supply chain. And the whole supply chain in China now face lots of the delays and also inventory shortages due to the restrictions. And the impact of COVID is far-reaching, which is unlikely to disappear within this year. And from the COVID experience, we see that the supply chain consists of a number of firms, and they are interrelated. And the actors at the upstream of supply chain are seriously affected by the distorted behavior of the downstream demands, because in the city, so there can also be some panic buying, fake news, and misinformation that can causing a lot of disruptions. And currently, in the lockdown, it's not just only in Shanghai. There can also be lockdown in Xi'an. So this lockdown caused a lot of problem. For example, there's constrained availability of human resources, raw materials, and also the consumables. And this related to about the subsequent capacity suspensions in almost all the industrial sectors. And we have also seen that the international logistics for maritime, air, and international would experience delays due to the restrictions. We can also see that currently in Shanghai and in many other cities, there will be a delay in the delivery, postponements, cancellations, and obstructions due to the strict quarantine policy and the closing of the city borders. So one good news is that in the last weekend, some factories put on the white list. So this means that they are allowed to resume the productions, but all the workers and all the people need to live in the closed area. They cannot leave. And these companies on the white list are allowed to resume the productions, including the Tesla and TSMC, and I hope that the productions facilities in Shanghai and other cities in China can be resuming. But I see that the disruption is not just only caused by the COVID, because as I mentioned before earlier, there can be also many misinformation, fake news, and also panic buying, and also the product stockpiling. This can also lead to worsening of the problem. But I think with the information technology and more transparency in the communications in the supply chain, so the problem can be eased. And about the logistics sector is suffering, particularly from a lack of worker throughout all the stages of the supply chain, because many of us, last month in Hong Kong, many of us, including the white-collar worker or blue-collar workers, are not available for work due to the quarantine restrictions or infections, even worse. So many vital roles performed by the workers cannot be done due to about the quarantine policy and also the travel restrictions. And we have been facing a lot of issues due to this black swan in recent months. So in Hong Kong, so now in recent months, we are also facing about the shortage of the truck drivers, because the driver, once they enter to the China, so they need to undergo some of the testing, and they need to, once that they are found that infected, they are not allowed to return back to Hong Kong, or some workers sick in Hong Kong, they cannot go to China. So we also are facing a lot of logistic problem, particularly the lack of the truck drivers to pick up the cargoes, and also to pick up the containers, and also to ensure the smooth operations of the logistics system. So Hercules, these are my sharing from the recent observations in Hong Kong and Shanghai. Thank you.
That is fantastic, Mike. Thank you really very much. Okay, before I open the floor to our discussion, I believe that you also looked into certain important aspects that Paul Kent had sent us in his communication. Two things, of course, significant shortages of goods, both in China, as you've mentioned, and in the United States. We see shortages everywhere. Actually, the other day, a couple of days ago, I went to buy a pair of shoes, which I liked very much. And in the shop there, they said, well, okay, let me make a phone call, and maybe in 10 days, we could have it for you. Things that really we hadn't experienced for a long time. Actually, what we look here is a Keynesian case of excess demand that is causing disruption, shortages, lack of goods and services, and high inflation, which all over the world, which in the United States only now is reaching 10%. And we hadn't seen this type of inflation since the 70s, I believe, 50 years ago. Now, the issue is, the other thing that you've raised, and we also raised with Paul, is the shortage in labor, which I believe is not due so much to COVID, but is a structural shortage in labor, in the sense that young people, we wrote about this in our paper with Paul, they do not want to become truck drivers anymore. They have very high opportunity cost, other possibilities, other areas to work. So unless serious steps are being taken to entice young people to the profession of labor of drivers, we are looking at a problem. Maybe that is not a problem, but a positive development, which in some parts of the world may allow us to move from road transport in other transport modes like rail or inland waterways, which are much better for our society and environment, and we are striving for this. And in the last point of Paul, it seems that soon there can be industrial action in the United States by port workers who claim that they should be entitled to a little benefit from the, let's say, maybe temporary profits that are being realized by both carriers and ports. So labor is an issue in all this. Shortages, we had seen them and we see them as a result of COVID because they had to stay in isolation and they didn't work, those that they were affected. But in bottom line, we believe that this may be also a structural development. The floor is yours. The discussion is open. Who would like to kick it off with a first remark? Theo, please.
Yeah, thanks, Hercules. I really enjoyed the contributions by Jan and Mike. All the points they raised were very interesting. I just want to add another element which I think is also important and which is having an impact, might have a long-term impact on how we deal with supply chains. That is that at a corporate level, you see people are very concerned about the supply chains and start to understand that these supply chains are critical to the long-term survival of the companies themselves. You see it at the retailer market. In the retailer market, you see it in very large production companies and so on. And this to me is hopeful, but at the same time also a little bit disruptive, possibly disruptive in the sense that it's indeed important to have supply chain issues being considered as extremely important next to production, next to other issues for a company. But at the same time, it's a little bit unclear on how this is going to unfold in the longer term. Are companies going to gain control again of their supply chains? And I already gave some examples of retailers and e-commerce firms who are very interested in getting more involved in logistics. And what will be done at the level of, for example, contract negotiations with shipping lines. I hear now from some large companies that even the CEOs themselves of large companies are involved in direct negotiations with shipping lines in order to get long-term contracts, because many shipping lines are not so eager to give long-term contracts anymore. So it's really at that level that we are talking about major discussions that are ongoing. And so it's going to be very interesting to see whether shipping lines are going to adapt to this new environment and also understand that having these very high freight rates and high profitability is not in their long-term interest. And also to see how the companies themselves, their customers are going to adapt, and maybe also, as I already indicated, going to take more control of the supply chains and might push out some other players in the market. So that to me is a very interesting long-term effect that might emerge from this whole Keynesian demand peak that we have seen.
Indeed so, Theo. And the same applies, of course, to ports and how we are going to deal with the new situation in our port sector, because over the years, we have tried to optimize the operations of our ports in a multitude of ways. But now, as you say, if time windows disappear, if schedules are becoming as unreliable as they are, to the extent that, to question if we need schedules anymore. But everything that we have done in ports was based on the very, very fine tuning time window, arrival, departure. If this is gone, what can we do? What is the new reality? Build new infrastructure? No, because this takes years, and we will not build new infrastructure because we had a temporary excess demand. We will not do this. We will try instead to optimize and find solutions, short-term solutions. What are they? What can we do to cope with the fact that in Los Angeles we have 100 ships waiting for a berth? That's my question. Jan, you raised your hand. So
Yes, there's
please.
no virtual hand in this platform, so I raised my real hand. No, very much along the lines of supply chains, logistics, what you and Theo both said. There's some really interesting data from the United States that shows within logistics expenditure, how much do I spend either on inventory holding or on transport. In 1980, within the United States logistics, there was more expenditure on inventory holding than on transport. Today, well, the latest for 21 is not yet out, but for the 2020 data, we have twice as much expenditure on transport than on inventory holding. Now, overall, this reflects this long-term trend we mentioned, this continuous optimization, just-in-time delivery optimization, better trade facilitation, faster ports, less time in port, long-term trend, and so on. And it does not mean that transport has become more expensive. I think people see this chart, I sometimes have this, it shows, wow, big change, more expenditure on transport. Actually, no, transport has become cheaper in the long term. No, the real, like, per container, per ton mile, we have more energy efficient ships, we have faster turnaround times, we have economies of scale. So because transport has become cheaper, we have bought more of it. And because it has become more efficient, we have spent less on inventory holding. Now, the big question is, will we come back? Will this be a turning point? Will we start spending more on inventory holding? This famous, instead of just in time, we say just in case. No, but I'm not so sure. I do see many of the practical solutions, and Hercules also said, infrastructure takes a lot of time, and a lot of the digitalization optimization solutions, we are also working on it at UNCTAD with customs automation, single windows, pre-arrival processing, port call optimization. All these would actually normally would further reduce the need for inventory holding. So I think we will continue to work on reducing the need for inventory holding, as much as possible. But at the same time, the need for inventory holding is going up because we want to be more resilient in all these hiccups and black swans, pink swans we have been seeing.
Indeed so. Mike, yes, please.
Yes, I agree with Jong's that inventory is the major logistic expense in modern enterprise. So transport costs are dropping in recent years. I trust due to a bigger share, bigger plane, and more efficient operations. And particularly during the COVID period, so there are many wastes, inventory wastes, due to panic buying of residents and due to stockpiling of many enterprise. And as mentioned earlier in my description, so visibility is very important to ease the disruption problem. Visibility and effective response to the disruption is the most effective resilience methods for enterprise. So because visibility is not only important to gain efficiency and agility during the normal production time, but also important to improve our understanding about what causes disruption in the supply chain. So it's important that we have the improved visibility because supply chain disruption in one segment can have a ripple effect to another segment. So if one segment is not transparent, the other segment will be affected, just like shipping. So here in the upstream is not transparent, the downstream cannot coordinate effectively. This will cause a lot of wastes. And in logistics, the most important expenses is the inventory wastes. And we need to think about how to improve the visibility. So firms should also be sensitive, not just to the COVID, but there are many black swans in life. For example, wars, and also the trade tensions. In recent years, China and U.S. trade tension, there's lots of trade barriers. This can also be disruption for some enterprise because some products are on the restricted list. This can also be causing disruption. And we can also think about how to better leverage information technology, such as the analytics, cloud computing, to improve communications. We can also assist firms in developing visibility and help recognize the disruption in the early stage of the complex supply chain systems. So I think improving visibility and responsibility is most important. And also about the coordination between the upstream and the downstream supply chain partners is so important because from the supply chain literature, if there's low communication among the parties, this will cause us the scenario of the bullwhip effect in the supply chain, and the downside of the bullwhip effect is the inventory wastes. So these are my sharing, Hercules.
Okay, very valid. Thank you, Mike. Theo?
Yeah,
Theo?
thank you so much, Mike, for your comment on the issue of visibility, transparency in supply chains. And I also want to come back to a point that was made earlier by Hercules about the optimization of our operations. In my view, many of the digital initiatives that have been developed over the past years have been very much focused on indeed operational efficiency within the company at the terminal level or within the network of the same terminal operator, for example, and has not been directed a lot on creating this pipeline visibility throughout the supply chains. And this is mainly, I think, because of the fact that it's difficult to achieve the latter. It's very difficult to set up partnerships with others and to share data. I'm really blown away each time I hear from major terminal operators that in Europe, I know for some of them that up to 70% of all containers arriving at their terminals in Europe, they don't know what to do with it. They don't have any information where the container is going, which transportation mode needs to be used, and so on. And this is quite mind-boggling to me because that is already part of the core of the problem that we see at many terminals. So indeed, we need to share more information. We need to set up digital platforms that talk to each other in order to optimize the entire supply chain. And I see two directions the market is going. Some companies are indeed moving in the direction of setting up partnerships in order to create this pipeline visibility, Other companies, they say, in order to create this pipeline visibility, we just control the whole chain. We buy ourselves into the chain. We have the shipping lines as an example, but even terminal operators. If you look at what DP World has been doing with Syncreon and some other companies like Imperial Logistics, or what PSA has done recently by taking over BDP International, a major logistics company. And so there are different paths in order to create pipeline visibility, either set up formal and informal partnerships, or the other route is just by controlling the entire chain. And I think in the coming years, we will see a lot of this kind of tension building up in order to see which model, which approach is the most sustainable in the longer term.
Indeed. Yes. Thank you very much, Theo. Jan, something to add or elaborate upon before we see if...
No,
Because we are
I heard.
so many issues and
Yeah,
so many areas, all of them very important, which
yeah.
truly I believe that this forum should continue discussing. But please tell us
No,
if
lots of
this.
interesting thoughts, and I I heard also in terms of the future cost of shipping. It's of course very, very uncertain. It's a little bit like the soothsayer in Asterix. It will rain one day or another. So will the freight rates go up or down? It depends. At some point in time, they will go down. How much down? So I try to be careful. They say, okay, the average over the next 10 years compared to the average of the previous 10 years. And I gave 6 reasons that are pushing more upwards. But then there are also points that can push very quickly downwards. A huge economic crisis coming out of war and other negative trends that would shift the demand curve to the left. Then we really see this tremendous surge in new orders. It's amazing. So yes, this will shift the supply curve to the right and then put freight rates further down. Also, again, depending on the timeline, there is actually some positive impact of the current COVID pandemic. We have seen a lot of positive pressure on our own work to advance more, faster with the digitalization, with the port optimization, with the e-payments, e-documents, and so on and so forth. So I sometimes like to quip, so we have to lock in the progress made during lockdown. So there is progress being made. Depends how you calculate it. Some people say twice as fast as pre-COVID. In some areas, 5 times as fast as pre-COVID. So once we are really out of it, we will have improved systems that will reduce again the need for inventory holding. We will facilitate the just-in-time procedures. And last, 4th point, more on the optimistic side, but that's very, very long term. I'm not sure if we will actually live this, but once and if the energy transition is achieved and we really have moved to renewable energy also for shipping and manage the power to X, like renewable energy, solar, wind, water, others, convert to something, to X, hydrogen. And once this is really efficient, then the marginal cost of shipping will go down. There's also nuclear, who knows, in medium long-term future. So the marginal cost of shipping will go down. Ships will go at 30 knots. Then you need fewer ships for the same trade. So at some point in time, shipping will again be very, very cheap. No, so that's why we have to look at what time horizon are we looking at for whatever is relevant right now for policymakers and for shippers. I'm still rather pessimistic in the sense that we have quite many years ahead of us with higher and more complex trade logistics situations, and more expensive.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Yes, that's the always helps to be optimistic in life and look at the half full glass. One issue that When we first planned for this panel, one issue that we have raised, Theo too, was, is there a way to build into our systems a little bit of slack, a little bit of capacity in our systems in a way that this could absorb any disruptions similar or other that we could have in the future? And if we could, how much is this going to cost? And who is the one who should be called upon to pay for
Yeah.
it? So,
Can I just come in on this? We all remember the good old liner conferences, yeah, the cartels,
right.
and we all remember when we went on a plane and there were empty seats next to us. Now
Well
with all
done.
this yield management, it's much fuller. The ships are fuller, the planes are fuller. The alliances have been estimated to lead to like a 10% better capacity utilization of the ships that are members of an alliance. But all this, of course, makes the whole thing much more volatile. And do we want to get back to higher average costs to achieve more stable costs?
Jan, because I recently came to your city, flying from Athens. To do this 20, 30 years ago, I would pay maybe $500 for a flight from Athens to Geneva. You know how much I paid this time from Athens to Geneva with Aegean, oh no, I shouldn't mention company names, but with a certain carrier? 40 euros. Yeah. With 40 euros, I don't pay even for a bus ticket. I came, so that is the issue. The issue is who pays for for this slack that we had during conferences. We never had problems like this when we had conferences. Everything was so nicely arranged. Or with legacy airlines. And legacy airlines, as a result of too much competition, they disappeared. Sabena and Iberia, and in the US, almost all of them, they disappeared. And we have now the budget carriers. I don't know who is happy and who is unhappy. So who pays? Theo, what can we build into the system and who pays?
Yeah, now we come back to the issue that we've discussed before on the inventories. I think it's a bit a choice. Do we allow the system to have higher inventories so that you can take up any shock? Then, of course, your investments in the other assets in the chain will be far lower, or the needed investments. If you do not want to increase inventories and stick to the just-in-time principle as much as possible, then of course we will have to create more capacity in the nodes, the transportation nodes, whether that's a seaport or an inland port, and also in terms of the transport equipment. And as far as I've heard, and I've also been attending some of these other webinars with major retailers and major production companies, they all were saying more or less the same, that they were not willing to pay for higher inventories. So that there was no willingness to build up huge inventories in order to cope with the problems elsewhere in the chain. So then we come back to the old function of a port. That's the buffer function that the ports have always played. And then we come also to the discussion how to distribute the costs and benefits of having ports acting more as buffers in the system. Who's going to pay for that? And in my view, the ports have a very big role to play as a kind of buffer, but not at a very low cost. I mean, if we have to develop ports at sites that are very expensive, near water and so on, then obviously we cannot make that land almost available for free. which is the case in some ports around the world. And so I think this is a major debate, and that we come also back to the taxpayer, because in the end, some of the money that will be invested in ports will also involve taxpayer money in many ports around the world. So then the question is also the taxpayer willing to invest in ports in order to make sure that the large retailers and so on don't have to build up large inventories in order as a kind of safety stock. And so it's a difficult discussion. And I think it will all come down to also the power play, the relative power of the large retailers, supermarket chains, and so on, versus the power of logistics players in the market. And for the moment, it seems we are in a seller's market to some extent, so that there is relatively a big power in the hands of shipping lines and so on because of the capacity constraints in the market. But once there is a little bit more capacity available again, you will see that will switch very fast again towards a buyer's market. And then we have again another another game that's going to be played.
I think before, let's say, trying to see if we can wrap it up, I can say that we touched so many issues, and so we raised so many questions requiring answers that indeed we could continue forever discussing this, and discussing as well the equally important question: are we going back to what we have been doing in the past so many years, whereby precision, accuracy, reliability, and zero inventory? Because when we said that containerization brought in a revolution in transport, this revolution had to do, and everything that ourselves we have been doing for the past so many years, had to do with optimizing our systems in such a way as to reduce inventory to zero. And that is the definition of logistics as we know it. Are we going back? Or are we looking into a new reality? And is what we see today, that Despina called euphoria, is something to stay with us? Or is it just a part of the shipping cycle, of the business cycle? And before we know it, it will again be business as usual. And I made this point because, as Theo said, we all said as well, I don't see supply adjusting to the new reality. You made this point very clear, Theo. I don't see gross capital formation, gross investment taking place to cope with the surge in demand. And also, if we look at the order book when it comes to shipping, we don't see the euphoria of new building orders today like the one that we saw in 2009. You remember during the golden years of shipping from 2002 to 2006, the order book was at a level of 40% of the owned fleet, which was something really exceptional, and this led to what happened in 2009, 2010. Now we see, however, that investment in ships is much more prudent and cautious and not over expanding. You have the data, Jan, of the, and actually you had sent those to me from your sources, showing order book developments. So I don't know if you want to comment.
I don't have it at hand right now, but in container shipping, if you don't look at the number of ships, but really the capacity with the mega carriers, it is getting close to the early 2000s again with the order book. Now the concern I also have is that the latest data I've seen for all types of ships, still more than half of ships that are ordered today use traditional fuels. So, and they will live 25, 28, 30 or more years. So how are we going to reduce our emissions? How do we get to zero if even the ships, oh no, there are some that could be dual fuel, then there are some that are LNG, which I dare say is not really the solution if you look at emissions altogether. So the order book has been going up, but you're right. It's not yet as euphoric as it was in the early 2000s, and we also hope it's not going to be as bad as the financial crisis then later on in 2008, 2009.
Right. And let's keep in mind as well that, textbook economics, they say that if once you have a euphoria like this that we have today on the business cycle, this should be followed fundamentally by a recession and a slowdown. If it will be in 2003, in 2023, as I expect, or later, maybe we can hope that it will be short-lived and not very deep. I do not say this only myself. The other day we saw the forecasts from the Dutch National Planning Office, which hinted quite seriously on the possibility of 2023 being a year of a sort of a recession and slowdown. That is something we cannot exclude because, the business cycle is a business cycle. It's the only thing that is not going to change is the turning points of the shipping cycle. So let's see what is in store for us for next year, and maybe something that we can pick up in a follow-up discussion. We see. Theo, please.
Yes, we just had a discussion about capacity issues and particularly looking at the fleet and the order book. But if you look at ports, what also is quite interesting to observe is that we don't see major big projects being announced at terminal level.
Okay.
We have seen that in the early 2000s, there was one big project after the other, Yangshan in Shanghai. We had Busan Newport being developed. We saw Maasvlakte 2 being developed as one. That was all in the early 2000s that these plans were announced and developed. And we don't see it happening right now. There are a few, like Singapore is pushing ahead with its huge Tuas port, but that has already been decided upon quite a number of years ago. But for the rest, there's not really a lot of new massive development, even not in the US, where you would expect new initiatives to take place and then announced. It's not happening. And I think it's because of the current uncertainty in the market. We have not only seen COVID-19, before that we had the trade war issue between China and US. We have had several other disruptions. Now, of course, the war in Ukraine. And I think there is some hesitation in the market in general to really step into these kind of massive projects and to really say, okay, we are optimistic about the future. We are going to realize a new port area or a new terminal complex in order to be ready. It's not happening. And I fear that sooner or later, we will realize that we have all come too late with announcing these new plans, that we are again going to be getting into the same problem in a matter of years. So maybe for the years to come, things will ease, as also Jan said, okay, the freight rates will go down, maybe not to the level it was before, but I'm pretty sure sooner or later we'll end up in the same mess again, because we all thought, okay, now we have things under control, and then we realize we don't have the capacity, we don't have the human resources in order to deal with a new major demand peak. So I fear a bit that the current mindset is very much on controlling or trying to cope with what we are witnessing right now, and that we are maybe not enough thinking of the long-term aspects, and particularly the fact that it could happen again, that maybe in 10 years, 15 years, we could be facing again the same kind of demand peak, or at least a capacity crisis in the system. So the more fundamental a more fundamental approach to the issue is really needed, not just trying to find short-term solutions for a current crisis that is very clear.
I believe we would all agree to this, Theo. One thing is for sure that the current uncertainty as a result of COVID, etc., is not triggering substantial new investments. That is a conclusion that we can safely draw from our discussion. We do not see substantial, particularly infrastructure investments, to cope with the current supply chain uncertainty. Now, regarding as to whether we will see this in the future or not, of course, this is a big question mark there, and we need to look at the infrastructure plans around the world, particularly in the area of ports. We have seen reports, I think, from Drury, from OSA, and others, a few years before the COVID crisis, that they were calculating excess port capacity at the level of, let's say, 30%. OSA had calculated 30% excess capacity. But then, of course, at the same time, we have the requirements and the plans of the rest of the world for new infrastructure capacity. Let's look at Africa, both West Africa and East Africa, tremendous demands for new port infrastructure. And everybody is quite keen, like the World Bank and others, to come in and give the money. And let's look at, for instance, at Eurasia and the demands for infrastructure that we have there. So, as you say very, very correctly, we have to distinguish short-term adjustments to cope with the crisis and long-term structural plans in terms of developing, our infrastructure, particularly ports. So both aspects are important. Mike, can we ask you to say a few final words about our panel?
Oh, okay. So this is a very interesting panel. So we have discussed a lot of issues about the port capacities, about the inventory problem, and Yong has mentioned about just in time. Maybe and now in the COVID situation, we also need to think about just in case. So just that we need to have some inventory redundancy, so, meaning that we can have a better ability to improve our flexibility and responsiveness to address these disruption issues. So Theo has mentioned about the capacity problem in port, and also the capacity is also an inventory problem. So the capacity redundancy, meaning that we have more capacity, can help to reduce the risk of disruption when the supply chain experience some other black swan. So this my thinking. So maybe rather than just in the traditional approach to think about the lowest cost optimizations, greatest profitability. Now in a disruptive time, we need to switch our pendulum a bit to think about the just-in-case issue, to have the better preparations rather than the inventory. So maybe in the supply chain, we can also think about the alternative sourcing and supply, and also to have the diversified supplier in different geographical areas to better cope with the black swan. These are my suggestions. Thank you, Hercules.
No, before I really trying to find words to thank you enough for your availability to to have this beautiful discussion. Really, most enjoyable. I might try to say that one issue that we didn't quite discuss, and it is an important issue, is regulatory aspects and what is going on in this area, in the US and Europe. If something is going on in Europe as well, I do not know. But important aspects regarding shipping and ports, maybe let's put it on the table that we could find the time to discuss those aspects at another meeting. But at this point, really indebted to all three of you and to Despina, to Slide2Open organization for hosting us. And again, thank you very much. It was nice to see you and to have you on this table. We look forward to the, how we should be able to disseminate this discussion through the way that the organization will save it. And yes, see you next time, hopefully. I wish you a great time. For those who still have to celebrate Easter, which is coming next Sunday, I wish you happy Easter. And yes, and let's hope that things will improve in the future. But even if they do not, this means that we have a lot of things to write about. Someone suggested, I don't know, I think it was Paul, that if we could transcribe this discussion, and put it down on a piece of paper, then we might have something very nice to publish. So let's keep this in mind as well. And in the meantime, have a good time. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Hercules.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Hercules. Bye-bye, Jan.
Thank you.
Mike.
Really thank you. Bye-bye.